So welcome to the Kanban Coaching Exchange tonight. Great to see so many of your faces and some regulars, so it's always cool. Plus lots of people here from the Kanban University as well, so it's always fun. Tonight's speaker is Dave White, and I've known Dave for a while now, and sometimes when I don't know things, which does happen, sometimes I don't know things, there's a few people in life that I talk to about Kanban. And Dave White is often somebody that I turn to and say, what does this mean? Like, how do I even teach this? And what I love about Dave is that he always makes the time for me. We end up creating some slides. We have some really deep debates about things and we put the world to rights about Kanban. But he's really helped me personally grow. I've never told him this, but I'm telling him now. But he's helped me grow in my Kanban knowledge. And I really appreciate the community spirit that he puts in and how he helps other people. So Dave is a coach, a consultant, an accredited Kanban trainer. He does lots of work with different clients. So he has an oodles amounts of experience to be able to share with us tonight. So Dave, I'm going to hand over to you.
Wow. Am I blushing here? A little bit red in the face? That was super kind. Thank you very much, Helen. Yeah, so I'm just gonna, if I'm too tiny there, that's okay. I'm trying to get out of the way of the content, but still make it accessible. Thank you all for joining and thinking that this is an interesting topic. I'm a Kanban nerd, so I think it's really interesting. I think it's a bit of a gap in our body of knowledge about why and how, at least I'm sure that there's people who know this, but in something that's been put out there. So yeah, so thanks for listening to me. Just want to thank Helen for inviting me to do this. And I've seen a couple, I think I've seen one actually, Kanban Coaching Exchange. I watched Alexi's for sure. Actually, I think I watched Fernando, so I think I've seen two. So it's a great community that's here. Thanks, Helen. And this is just a slide about me. You don't need to know a lot about me. This is just, I've been involved with Kanban for a long time. So I think I have some opinions. I'm not afraid to share them, but I'm also testing my opinions. So if you hear me say anything that you disagree with, I would love to have a conversation about why, and let's make our body of knowledge better by having that conversation. So just a little agenda. I always do this just to give you a sense of what I'm going to be going through, and it keeps me grounded. Anyways, why did I make this talk? Why are we talking about this? And this comes from a desire to learn, share. We're going to laugh, we're going to cry a little bit, but I want this presentation to be a learning exercise, both for myself and for you. And we're going to talk about a business or a team or an organization. This is I've worked with these teams and these organizations many times. You probably all do. There is some job that we are doing, and there is a pressure to produce. Everyone feels like there's problems around us, but they maybe can't necessarily put their finger on those problems. Probably someone read a book or someone watched a webinar like this one and said, hey, we need to go do this. This is going to help us solve our problem. So we insert our process improvements, or we insert our framework or our methodology in here, and whoops, everybody's happy. This is going to solve all of our problems. And then a couple years later, we haven't actually moved the needle on pressure. We still have process problems. We are probably not as happy as we would like to be. We're not enjoying our job as much as we could. And so our business isn't thriving. Our business might be succeeding. I don't want to make this a total doom and gloom where businesses are going out of business, like they're failing for some reason, but I always see so much potential for a business to do better than it is whenever you run into these situations where there's poor management techniques. Usually there's a bunch of, a CEO or an owner or a stakeholder is knows that we've been on this transformative attempt and it isn't working. And so there's more books. And then someone will say, well, what if we just do what we're doing better? Which is a really sad statement because it sort of diminishes the fact that humans in your organization are all trying to do their best. There's usually something that they just haven't learned or something that they haven't tapped into that is holding them back. This is where we all should run away from this particular situation, but the people in this call, myself included, we're sort of a bit of a glutton for punishment, and we go seek out these opportunities to try and give organizations a chance to do better. So my little tip to all of us mostly is that the problem is usually not the process. I mean, it is sometimes if the process that you've adopted, the methodology, doesn't have any advice for you in this regard, then it potentially will hold you back. But generally speaking, it's not that. It's more of the organizational mindset that comes from adopting it in this way in the first place. Most organizations that I've encountered that are trying to do improvement think that there's going to be a silver bullet methodology. If I just do this, everything gets better. So we need to do something about that. We usually think that the job ends, the transformation ends. I've had this conversation with a number of people, and we always speak about the transformation project as opposed to the ongoing capability to analyze and adapt. So organizations tend to think that the job ends. Organizations also have this very team-centric approach. So if I just fix this team, or if I just teach the teams to fix themselves, then things will get better. There's also this hero implementation aspect that I see very often. We empower one person to be the smartest person in the room. We give them all the authority and support that they need to do their job really well. And then it fails because they're just one person. They're one perspective. We aren't crafting or we aren't leveraging an approach that is using the whole community, using everybody involved at the organization to improve the situation. And then finally, very often in my experience where I come to an organization that's struggling, leadership has sort of disconnected themselves. They've asked the teams, they've empowered them to go off and do it on their own, and they don't need to be involved, which isn't a very good situation either. Leadership fundamentally provides alignment, support, guidance, expertise. And so when we have leaders that disconnect from the process, it's just we've removed an opportunity to succeed. So this is, and again, most processes don't address these core problems. And my goal was, I come to the organization like, hey, how can I find a low-cost, scalable activity that's designed to mitigate these risks all the time? And then we can try to drive towards business success. The important things about this is that it has to be relatively inexpensive. It has to scale. It has to be continuous. And it has to be driving towards business success. Otherwise, I think that we are pigeonholing ourselves into, local optimizations and specific tactics that don't cover off the whole business. And so this is where I'm just going to quickly, before I jump into this, I've made some assumptions in all the stuff, everything I've talked about before, you probably hopefully have experience with, or you've experienced business challenges, you've experienced process transformation challenges. So hopefully that wasn't too geeky for you. In the rest of this talk, I need to make a couple assumptions. The most important one is that you sort of speak Kanban. And by that, you're familiar with a Kanban University's body of knowledge. That's the language, the dialect of Kanban that I speak. I haven't gone too deep on any of that stuff. That more generic Kanban language will suffice. Another assumption that I've made is that you have a work tracking technique or practice, or you have experience with work tracking. One of the things about SDRs is that they're very data-driven. That data comes from managing and watching our work. So if you don't have that, you can totally participate in this talk. I don't want you to leave or anything like that. But you may not be ready to start SDRs until you have put some of these work tracking techniques in place, because we, as I show you, we'll need them. And I have assumed that you have a problem. And I use the word here, sources of dissatisfaction. That's a very Kanban University statement, but this is more a call to you to think about the problems that you have today in your business as we talk through the examples and things like that we have here, so that you can connect your problems to the words that I'm going to share, the ideas that I'm going to share with you. So those are my assumptions. Helen has told me that if you guys ask a question in the chat that needs my attention right there at that point in time in the talk, she can interrupt me for sure. But otherwise, we'll handle all the questions at the end as well. So that's how we get on to service delivery reviews, which I think are a very important cadence. That's a Kanban University word for a periodic meeting that I think is actually the primary motivator for organizational improvement that we should be leveraging more often. Just as a word of advice, failure is an option. We probably actually always should be considering it or encouraging it, because when we fail, we learn. And when we learn, we can adapt. If we never reach, if we never try to do things that we thought were impossible, then we'll never find the boundaries, we'll never find the improvements. So don't think of anything in here as something that you have to do it right the first time. You should be seeking to just experiment, learn. The stuff that I am showing you is, I've done this a number of times. I probably, I wrote in my notes, I think I've probably done 100 SDRs in the last 3 or 4 years at 2 different clients. So that's where most of my case or my user experience comes from. My experience comes from those 2 companies. But if I didn't try and reach and stuff like that, I wouldn't have learned. And if you try something that I do, it didn't work, that's not because I don't think that we should do this, or you should just try to find a different way of doing it so that you learn from that. So first I want to start with the positive. Why do I think that service delivery reviews work to get systemic, pragmatic, sustainable improvements in organizations? And when they're done correctly, and I have seen SDRs done wrong, but when they are done correctly, they get the right people involved. Cadences are great habit builders. So if you say, I'm going to have a meeting every 2 weeks, and you actually fulfill that meeting request, you're building a habit, and you are going to get better at doing it, which reinforces the habit, which makes us better at doing it. So cadences are powerful habit builders. SDRs are very data-driven, and we are striving to always improve that. But by giving ourselves data and time to reflect on it and some time to converse about it, we engage our system too, which is the analytical aspect of the human mental process. SDRs also have this idea. We have these 3 roles, these 3 people who attend an SDR. And when we have these SDRs, these 3 roles know that you care about them, which is a part of the human side of this. When you engage with people and say, hey, how are you feeling? How are we doing? Are we going in the right direction? These people become more engaged. And these are the 3 important roles that we'll see are important to doing an SDR. Also, when you dedicate an hour or so every 2 weeks or every month to organizational improvement, it gives those improvements time to be reflected on and worked on because we're having a meeting about them. So the SDRs themselves, the cadences, the activities that come out of them, they give improvements more time to be implemented and to work. And SDRs themselves can be done incrementally. If you have any experience with the Kanban method, you know that one of the things that we do is start with where we are and incrementally adapt and incrementally change the system. The SDRs are no different. So you start with an SDR and you start with what you have. And then you discover, hey, we could improve it, or we could add something to it, or we could take something away from it. So the SDRs themselves are designed to take on the Kanban University's mindset of continuous improvement. Where have I seen that SDRs failed or had challenges being adopted? Companies that have taken a Kanban class and didn't have any experience with this, they'll say, oh, I'm going to just do this whole thing. So this big bang adoption usually ends up overwhelming the facilitators, the participants, and it leads to, this sucks. Why are we doing this? Let's stop doing it. So that, big bang adoption and is overwhelming is certainly a big emotional problem. Participants who come and just see it as another time suck, another time sink where we like, I'm going to spend an hour in here. I've got things to do with that hour. So if it's a boring meeting, if it's a status meeting, people are just going to be like, oh, why is this meeting happening? I don't want to be here. Which again, we want to engage with people. We want to have them happy to be here. We want them to be participating. So those are reasons why it fails. The other one is a parade. I've been in SDRs, I've been able to watch SDRs where it's a big, like, look how awesome we are. And so it's a parade of how amazing we are. There's actually no problems that are ever presented. There's no conversation about where do we need to improve? Why would we improve if we're already awesome? So I've seen SDRs not meet their potential when there are no problems to deal with. Sometimes we start creating data, but we don't create useful data. We just create metrics that usually either are some sort of parade or not they attribute to the boring status because it's nothing that any of the attendees care about. So not having useful data or having the wrong people in attendance. Why am I here? This has nothing to do with me, because we get into this meeting invite syndrome where it's like everybody gets to invite themselves. They don't have a reason to be there, but they don't want to be left out. So a little bit of fear of missing out, but we want to have to be a very pragmatic and focused meeting. So having the right people in the room at the right time is important. The other thing too is that sometimes SDR, like generating these reports is tiring. It could be a lot of work. So if you don't spend time automating it or making it as easy to produce the report as you can, then it will lead to SDR fatigue, for lack of a better term. And then the last one is this is just a very hard problem. This is a people problem, generally speaking. How do I convince people to come and commit to changing the way that the organization works, or helping to change the way the organization works? In which direction do we have to work? This is just a hard problem. So if we don't acknowledge that and try to take baby steps with important pragmatic stuff that's seen as useful to the business, your SDRs will be at a disadvantage as far as taking hold. So as I've trying to, we have to learn to avoid failure modes. We can't avoid them. You can't just opt out of them. Failure is going to happen. So we need to learn how to avoid various aspects that are prone to failures. And the 3 points that I want to convey to you that will address some of the problems that we saw about why SDRs fails are these 3 points. I want you to make your SDRs as specific as possible. This is a goal of making them pragmatic, making them short, making them engaging, making them useful. The second one is that SDRs often fail when you don't practice them or you don't do them enough, and they aren't seen as a valuable activity in and of themselves. So doing them often allows you to improve and make them more valuable, which leads to the third step. As you do them, you can improve them, and you can make them more often, or make them more useful to you on a more frequent basis. So these are the 3 points that I would like to sort of, cover off with you guys about what I've learned about making SDRs more likely to stick. Oh, bonus coaching tip, and also a veiled warning, leading back to sort of first big bang one. There are incremental options for everything that I'm going to show you. Whether it's the number of work items that you start to manage, or the number of metrics that you start to manage for those work items, or the people who you invite to the meeting. You don't have to invite everybody I tell you to, or I tell you to, that you would do in a very mature situation, to your first SDR. So I encourage you to try to think about the least dangerous way of trying to apply any of the tips that I give you in the next little bit. So service delivery reviews tend to be seen as a catch-all initially. One of the important things, though, is that a service delivery review is one of 7 cadences in the Kanban method. You don't need to have this one meeting do all the things that all of these 7 meetings are trying to do. So it's the place where we look to improve or review a single team's service. So it's not multiple teams. There may be indications that there are problems in other teams when you're doing a conversation about how your team is doing, but this review is in the context of a single service or a team. The number one goal of the SDR is to stimulate improvement. So if you don't feel like you are discovering a problem, which is going to motivate you to make a change to the way that you work, you're going to have to reflect on your service delivery reviews agenda. The next outcome is generally to make sure that everybody is agreeing or has alignment in the courses of action and the activities that we are participating in the pursuit of improvement. Are we improving in the right direction? Are we improving the right things? Are we all aware that this is the thing that we are trying to improve? So this is one of the other aspects of the service delivery review. As I mentioned, it is not about fixing problems. It's about discovering the motivation to change. What are our existing problems? Which is not to say that a little bit of problem solving might not happen inside of an SDR, but if you find that you're trying to dig into a problem to come up with a solution, it's time to parking lot that and have another meeting. Otherwise, your service delivery review becomes boring to the people who don't care about that particular problem. And it's also not a place where we talk about individual work items. So at our daily stand-up, we talk about today's work items that are stuck, late, blocked, maybe about to be late, or need some sort of help. At replenishment meetings, we talk about specific work items to pull into the process. At delivery planning meeting, we talk about specific items to push out of the process, or they're about to come out of the process. That's not what we want to talk about at a service delivery review. So if you find that these other concerns are bleeding into a service delivery review, it's becoming a little less specific than it needs to become. So into the stimulating improvement aspect, I mean, the number one goal of an SDR is to find out what's wrong, to give us a motivation to improve. In order to improve, we need an expectation that we are not, well, we need an expectation first. I would expect that I will get a hamburger from McDonald's in 5 minutes. If that is not true, I'll let the manager at the McDonald's know, and he will try to fix his service if he thinks that my business is important enough for him. When we are talking about businesses like ours and knowledge work, it is much better to have this being an explicit expectation than a tacit one. Helen, she got mean here, and she probably had tacit expectations about the duration of the meeting, but she was explicit. So now there's no surprises. So explicit is always better than tacit. Otherwise, we get surprised. If you only have tacit, you can start there, but you're probably going to, that's a little bit frustrating. So you've got an expectation, but now we need to have something to contrast this with. So we need a capability. And this is where Kanban systems come into play. We prefer quantitative over qualitative metrics. Qualitative metrics tend to be a little bit hard to pin down. Saying that, oh yeah, we're doing good. Well, good covers a very broad range. Whereas if you say, oh, we're delivering 35 of these per week, then someone else can say whether that is good or not compared to the expectation that has been presented. So stimulating improvement kind of requires both of these two things. We need a capability and an expectation where we can compare them and see if there is a disconnect between either of them. The thing that we need to know is know what matters. And in order to know what matters, we need to understand who we are seeking to come and present either an expectation or a capability. And this is where we start to get into the primary roles that I expect should be offered an opportunity to be at an SDR. So the first thing we want customers. Now, you're probably going to say, Dave, I can't invite all my customers. I work for a SaaS and all of my customers are the world. I can't invite them all to my SDR. And I'm like, no, I don't want you to invite them to your SDR, but I want you to invite somebody who represents their voice. If we don't know what our customers, the people who are exchanging some sort of dollar for some sort of value proposition, and whether we're doing it well enough for them, then we're not going to be able to improve to better suit their needs. The other thing that we need to do is understand the business side of our service. So this is what I call stakeholders. These are typically going to be team leads, directors, maybe vice presidents, but people who have awareness and desire for this business to improve. And finally, I don't want to forget that there are people who are actually doing this job. These are what I call service members or team members. And we want to make sure that these people are at the table conveying aspects of what matters to them. So when we think about customers, these are questions we've probably all heard. When will it be done? How many can I get? Will it be on time? Is it good quality stuff? But basically, customers are going to ask all these questions. Ultimately, what we're trying to get down to is, can I trust you? Because if I don't trust you, I'm going to go somewhere else if I can. And that's not good for the business. Stakeholders ask more business-oriented questions. Are we keeping customers happy? Are we operating efficiently? Are we right-sized for our needs? And if we're not any of these things, are we improving? Are we going to improve our business? Are we improving our operational efficiency? Are we getting more customers? If we're not, then we're stagnant or we're vulnerable to disruption in the market. And finally, there's the service members or team members, and these are more about, are we overburdened? Are we finding flow? Are we happy, or can we succeed? These are more health metrics than they are business or operational efficiency metrics. But they are no less important, because an important aspect of running a business is keeping your employees happy, motivated, and succeeding. So these are the three primary roles that I always encourage to participate in the SDRs. When we have those roles and we have those questions and we have the various metrics, then we can start to ask ourselves if our service is meeting these expectations. So we're going to have metrics for the customers. So they're going to want to know about work. How long does work take? How many of these kinds of work do you do? How is this service performing overall? Does it meet my needs? Stakeholders are going to have a bunch of different fitness criteria, business objectives, maybe they're OKRs or BMM or customer satisfaction metrics that they need their business to meet. And team members are going to have wellness criteria, wellness fitness criteria. Are we overburdened? Do we have excess hours? Are we effective? Do we have good flow efficiency, which is a Kanban term for not being interrupted? Am I being able to get into doing my work and get it done, or am I constantly being tapped on the shoulder? That's flow efficiency. So when metrics meet expectations, we can start to ask other questions. So I introduced a term called fitness criteria, and I just wanted to differentiate that from expectations. So expectations, I feel, are somewhat binary. Either meeting it or you're not. But when you take a bunch of expectations together, it actually provides a more concrete description of the whole experience that a customer may be having with you. And so that fitness criteria group expectations of that whole experience. Chronic failure to satisfy fitness criteria will lead to an erosion of trust, and then erosion of trust is just bad for business. So try to use the term fitness criteria. It certainly aligns with Alexi's work. It came that the term came from Fit for Purpose that Alexi and David wrote. I probably tweaked it a little bit to my needs as far as a motivational talk. It's not the specific details of how to do fit for purpose analysis, but certainly have to thank Alexi and David for introducing these concepts. So from a customer's perspective, I have a capability metric that my service is telling me that it can meet, and I have my expectations now that I want to express, and I'm going to express them in this language of Kanban. So this is a bit of a disjoint here where customers may not know how to speak this language, and where the team and the SDR itself, they will practice it and they'll hear it and they'll learn how to have that capability after several SDRs. So from a customer fitness criteria, we can say, a service can say most of the time we can finish whatever it is that is the work request here in 10 days or less. And most of the time is a number that we use in the Kanban community. It's not really important what that number is, but what it means is that you are predictable. You do this often enough that someone says, yeah, they do that well enough times. There's always going to be something that exceeds an expectation. You're never going to cover it off perfectly. Always something could go wrong in knowledge work. So most of the time, you're right. Once in a while, yeah, that's just the nature of knowledge work, and we're okay with that. So your service says we're doing something in 10 days or less most of the time. A customer then can say, I really need that finished in 8 days or less most of the time. And now we have a statement that is what the customer needs and our measured capability, and it's created an opportunity to improve. We have to shave 2 days off of our lead time for whatever this piece of work is. How are we going to do that? I don't know, but now we have a motivation to improve. For stakeholder fitness criteria, they have different ways of expressing what they need. And we have different ways or we would have slightly different metrics that we would want to contrast against. So a service says it can deliver 10 features per month on average over the last 6 months. A business can say, well, for our market penetration efforts this year, we need to finish 50 features in the next 6 months. How they came up with 50 features or the 6-month time frame is, I'm trusting there's a valid and appropriate business process doing that. But the stakeholder has said, this will help our business succeed. In this case, we see that, oh, well, we're doing about 60 every 6 months. Should be okay. But at least we know over the next 6 months when we're doing these features that if our delivery rate of features drops, we need to have a conversation with our business stakeholders. We need to have a conversation with our team about maintaining this fitness level so that our stakeholders and our business have a chance to succeed. But this awareness is really important, and we will reflect on this every couple of weeks or every month and make sure that this statement is always somewhat true. And finally, there's a team member fitness criteria, and I've got a couple in here because I think it's actually really important. Having the wellness, having your team and its wellness front of mind is important. When we talk about WIP limits in the Kanban community, why do we use the word WIP limit? Well, we use the word WIP limit because we're chronically overburdened, and we needed to have a methodology state you need to limit WIP. Otherwise, you're going to burn people out. So a lot of what the Kanban community and the Kanban method has tried to do is to actually improve member fitness, wellness. And so we can measure that, or we can try to measure that. So the service would say our overall WIP for the service averages about 5 items. There's always 5 items that are open and in flight. And a team member or team members could say, well, we have 5 active work items. It's hard to focus. We're being interrupted all the time. Maybe a better target might be 3. So now we have a reason to improve our overall WIP statistics. Can we get it down so that we can maintain our service levels with our customers, but also improve the health indicators for our team members? Another one is, and this one is a little bit tricky, is our lead time is, of whatever the work item is, exceeding our customers' expectation. And then team members can say, well, we are often blocked by some dependency on this particular work item type, and it's very frustrating. Can we reduce the frequency of that situation happening? Or can we eliminate the dependency entirely? But what we have here is a service saying we have an expectation, and the team member saying, well, our implementation details are frustrating us. If you want to fix that, we need to make sure that we're also reducing interruptions, reducing distractions. And so both of these can now be measured. This one is actually, the lead time starts the question, but the frequency of interruptions would be the metric that we would want to improve. So that's it, though. After you've done those things, we have a very specific meeting that should take 30 minutes or less. This is just a ballpark. I find that SDRs that take an hour, there's usually a lot of extra stuff in there. Maybe the SDR could be broken into 2 different sub-teams. I'm not sure. But generally speaking, people are very tolerant of a 30-minute meeting, especially if you finish in 15 minutes and tell them, hey, you're free to go early. But you have a meeting that has a very specific purpose that's supposed to bring useful quantitative metrics to a conversation with your customers about their needs versus your performance, or about stakeholders about your current direction versus where you need to go, and with your team members about your health and well-being. If you're talking about anything else, then you got to find a different meeting, because you're going to be boring somebody or making the meeting too long, or spending too much time talking about things that are better talked about other places. And again, this should be an opportunity to discover data-supported opportunities to create better alignment between fitness criteria and capabilities. So that's it. If your SDR, I can certainly have a conversation about this, but if your SDR is doing any more than this, you are going back down that route of things that will potentially make your SDRs less valuable, or less likely to take hold and provide the benefits to your business that we really want them to take. So we had specific. Now we're talking about how frequently we do them. So I say to do them often. Now, whenever someone says, how often should you do your SDRs? I say you should do them 2 weeks. You're like, well, I can't do them every 2 weeks. I'm like, well, sure, maybe it's a bit of a stretch, but would you rather do this thing 26 times a year, or would you rather do this thing 12 times a year? Which do you think you will get better at doing this from a frequency perspective? There's a English football match on right now, or maybe it's over by now. Do you think that soccer team or football team, sorry about the North Americanism there, do you think that football team only practices once a week and then plays a game once a week? Or do you think they practice 5 times a week to be really good for the game, and they practice all year long, or a good chunk of the year before the guys take a break for the summer? So that's why I always say that 2 weeks is a good cadence. If it's too much of a stretch, try 4 weeks. But if you're doing it any less than 4 times a week, you're not practicing enough. You're not going to get better at it, and you're not going to see the benefits from doing it as much as you really would like to. So a couple things go into why. So again, this is the practice talk I was talking about. I would rather practice more frequently and become really good at it. The other aspect that you want to consider is the information arrival rate. So if information arrives daily, weekly, bi-weekly, then you have an opportunity to act on that information. If information doesn't arrive that frequently, I'm picking on Alexei because he's a good friend of mine and he has lots of examples that he's told me about, but he talks about pharmaceutical industries doing Kanban, and information about drug approval processes doesn't happen very often. So maybe in that case, the information arrival rate is once every 3 months. So why would you have an SDR every 2 weeks if nothing changed? So consider the information arrival rate. In knowledge work, generally speaking, I think 2 weeks is appropriate. It's a good starting point. And then the final one is the risk tolerance. How long are you or your company willing to let a problem go undiscovered before you would have the opportunity to act on it? SDRs do not fix problems, but they discover them. So how long do you want to be in a somewhat dangerous or risky situation before you give yourself a repetitive systemic approach to discover that problem? So this is why I always start it with 2 weeks. I'm certainly happy to flex up to 4. Anything beyond that, you have to get into situational specific advice, which isn't knowledge work situation, or isn't this particular talk. So after you've been doing this years for a little while, though, you should feel comfortable to adapt. Once you become very good at doing these kinds of management and answering these kinds of questions, you may not need to meet every 2 weeks. You're doing this all the time. So maybe doing it to 4 weeks, because we do want to keep touching base with our stakeholders and our customers, but the team part, maybe you're doing this almost daily. So you feel more comfortable about going to 4 weeks, or potentially to on-demand. I'm always a little bit suspicious of on-demand because that usually means never again. And I do want to make sure that I'm touching base with my stakeholders and with my customers somewhat periodically and giving myself a chance to learn what they have to say about how we're doing. But 100% adapt. Start at 4 weeks, move down to 2 when you get comfortable. Start at 6 weeks, move down to 4, then move down to 2. The important thing is to make sure that you're doing the right cadence for your organization today. Which finally leads into improving the SDR itself. Whenever you do an SDR, you'll discover how much it does or doesn't fit for you. You'll discover that there's data that's missing. And System 2, and I'm sorry if I didn't describe this, Professor Daniel Kahneman described humans the way we think as System 1 and System 2. System 2 is the analytic side. It's slow, and it needs a lot of time to digest data, to make decisions. System 1 is the emotional side. Your gut reaction to the title of this talk made some of you want to come or not come before you thought about, well, what's in the agenda? System 1 is constantly happening, and it is the thing that governs a lot of our behavior. And so we need good data to empower System 2, because our System 1 is happy to refute any claims or holes in your data. So more data, better data helps us be more engaged with it. If it's not good data, then you're just going to disconnect from it. Let System 1, your emotions, generate your decisions. You can adapt the audience. So I always say to people, start with the service team members only. Service members, team members don't like to air their dirty laundry. They don't like to talk about their problems in front of other people. And you don't need to invite customers and stakeholders to start. But at some point, you're going to want a voice of the customer or the voice of the stakeholder to start to appear. That may involve inviting them. Your agenda and your cadence, things that you talk about, can ebb and flow over time. Generally speaking, we're always going to be contrasting customer, stakeholder, and team metrics against the expectations, but you can, if there's not a lot coming from your stakeholders at a particular point in time, flex the agenda, keep the meeting short, use your parking lot as needed. And the last one is you just automate it as much as possible. I'm going to quickly show you a little SDR report that I have here that is a push button It goes off, grabs data, and generates a whole bunch of things for me. If your SDR reports aren't automated, they may take a lot of time to build, which diminishes the amount of time that people will spend looking at them to provide insights, to have meaningful conversations with the customer, stakeholders, and team members that are on your team. Last bonus tip, somebody has to facilitate this meeting. And if you can find someone who's a great storyteller, who loves to tell the story, your SDRs will have a better chance to succeed. This is, the SDR facilitation role is underappreciated probably, but if you find someone who you love to listen to, who can make Kanban metrics sound exciting or interesting, you should get that person to facilitate your SDR. So that's all my points. I just wanted to quickly show you what I have as an SDR report. Now, this is built from an actual client engagement. We are using this actively. I've polished this up and made it a sample, and it's kind of mostly anonymized. But if you can build yourself something like this, that's just a structure, a framework that guides you through your SDR activities that you can then automate, or then make sure you're always doing it relatively consistently, then you're going to make your SDRs more likely to succeed. All of our SDRs start with some sort of introduction. There's a lot of Kanban nerd terms that are in here, right? We have the SDR period, the LTT period. We have measurement boundaries. What's the system lead time, customer lead time? You need to kind of have all of this preamble here, because there's going to be people who aren't as fluent in Kanban as I am. So I don't have to necessarily talk about it in detail at the introduction, but having this here for everybody who approaches this report is going to be put in better footing than if they weren't, if these definitions weren't here. The next one is just, what do you do? What does this service or what does this team do? So we call this a service catalog. It's a workflow. The development service is probably a workflow. The things that go into that workflow, in this case, features, bugs, tech debt, security reviews. This team also provides another service, operational support. So we have application configuration support or emergency access requests. And we do have allusions to classes of service that can be applied to those work items. If you don't have classes of service, don't worry about it. Take them off. This is part of that incremental adaptation. Bring what you have today. Don't create a whole bunch of stuff that you don't have yet, and then figure out how you want to integrate that into your improvement activities. Adding a class of service is an improvement activity, which leads us into experiments. If your team has a bunch of experiments that are on the fly about various improvements that you are working on or would like to work on in the future, you can just have a quick summary here. This is not intended to be a big debrief of the individual project or activity that will be the support, but it just tells you and participants what you are planning to do that would eventually see some sort of impact here in the SDR. So I've just got 3 here. They're just examples, but and by the way, my goal is to produce this report, and I'll show you in a second. You can turn it into a PDF, but then I'll give this to you so you guys can all read this sample in detail later on. Again, in the report, next section, we're in the customer section. So answer customer questions, service capabilities versus customer fitness criteria. Again, customers are probably coming here not knowing your language or your terminology. So we're just trying to give them some information to get grounded. And then we get into this slide, this is actually, I realized too late that this is a bit of an overwhelming slide, but this team does features as one of its work item request types. These features all have a different size, which leads to different expectations. So a customer or a stakeholder or a team member can come to this page, see that we're talking about features, the various size dimensions of them, and then we can contrast those with what our customers' expectations are. So this is looking at primarily lead time and how our lead time is doing compared to our needs. Here is a little graph that's showing our due date performance. Are there things that are late? Or Are there things that are early? Are they too early? Whether this is important to you, I don't know at this moment in time. These are just ideas about things that you would want to measure that Kanban systems are good at capturing, which will potentially drive improvements. If I have a bunch of late things, do I want to fix this? This looks like it's not a good thing, so I would want to fix this particular thing. There are what we call outliers, things that are away from the body of the distribution. These things are probably bad. They're probably things that represent a problem that happened in the system. We can talk about these things and start to eliminate root cause categories, make these things line up with their service level expectations. So we also have bugs, different kind of work item type. It just looks like, it just looks like the same thing. We're going through the same metrics again. But at the end of this, we've presented some information to our customers. We can see that we are or are not meeting your service level expectations. Do we need to adapt them? Have we captured them correctly? Is working with us easy? Do you feel like you're able to get information from us in a relatively easy fashion? You can ask these questions to get a sense of your fitness for these customers' needs in a more holistic sense. And then once you're done here, you can go. Tell the customers, thanks, we don't need you anymore. It's all going to be boring stakeholder and team level stuff after this. So they'll be happy to go. So you've made it more likely that they're going to come if you're not taking up the whole time. Stakeholders, same preamble, except we have business fitness criteria. And this is probably going to be an OKR, or it might be a customer demographic, or it might be some sort of economic aspect of this business. I don't have economics in this simulation yet, so but these are the questions that the stakeholders are more likely to be interested in making sure we're doing the right thing or getting guidance on how we are doing. And then you can ask the stakeholders these same questions. Have we captured your service level expectations? Are we aligned with your objectives going into the future? Have you noticed any problems that we didn't discuss? That's an opportunity in all of this. Is there always a problem that we didn't detect in any of the stuff that we've talked about that you would like us to try to detect? So again, trying to engage with people and have meaningful conversation about how we are doing for them. And then finally, the team. Again, primarily health fitness criteria. I put quality as a health fitness criteria because if we don't have time to work well, we tend to produce poorly, bad quality things. So I see quality as a potential leading indicator of overburdening. If we have poor quality, you probably will find overburdening or confusion happening in the background. So quality is an example, overall WIP levels of various work item types, flow analysis. Are we being interrupted? Are things arriving faster than we can get them done, which causes overburdening, which causes interruptions? These are all, sort of team level analytics that we don't need a customer's feedback or a stakeholder's feedback to address. If you have a flow efficiency metric, you need something to measure time on task, or if you have frequent blockers, you want to eliminate those blocking problems or those dependencies. But these are all things that a team can bring up, a team can discuss, and a team can use as motivation to make improvements. And then finally, just team questions. Have you felt overburdened? The team members, one of the challenges with SDRs is that team members are usually not used to being asked these questions. And there's a little bit of a social not wanting to admit that you're overburdened. So you may have to ask these questions frequently. So you better define metrics that talk about, that demonstrate these conditions without having to ask the question. But it's always good to engage. Hey, have you felt overburdened? Do you understand how the work selection happens or how the process works? Or are there any other problems that you've noticed in a service that we could use as a motivation to improve? So at that point, done. Talked about customer fitness criteria, stakeholder fitness criteria, customer fitness criteria, or team member fitness criteria, and we're done. We have action items, probably. We've taken notes. We have action items about where disconnects have happened, where we need to make improvements. We have motivation to change. We have a document that captures the point in time, what we were doing, and we can go. And that should have taken a half an hour or so. It won't take a half an hour the first time. It'll probably take an hour the first time because there's a lot of education that's going to be happening in that hour. But eventually it shouldn't. My experience is that it's not hard to eventually get SDRs to under 30 minutes in time. So that's this report, and this one in particular. You go export to PDF, and this is just going to run through this report and generate it and print it out, and now I can ship it off to all of you guys. And it happened on the day. So that was my example. I'm going to get through this real quick. Sorry, I'm taking a little bit long. I told Helen I might go over an hour. Very excited. I talk too much. Thanks for bearing with me. So these are the failure modes that I'm doing SDRs. When you're doing SDRs, watch for these things. There are countermeasures that you can apply that I hope that I've spoken to. Keep it short, talk about engaging things, let metrics talk, strive to be useful and clean data, make sure you're inviting the right people, automate and practice. So that's just the bullet points about what we just talked about for the last hour or so. I am fairly invested in this idea. Not that I'm not going to change it, but I think that this is one of the most catalyzing things that I can do, or I can help an organization do, so that they improve their business. It can happen in the most places. It can happen at the highest frequency, the lowest cost with the most people. Again, there's the daily stand-up is a very high frequency, lots of happening, but I don't know that it drives the improvement that SDRs potentially can towards customer fitness. It's not the purpose of that particular meeting. So I do think the SDR review is a really underappreciated tool in our toolbox for affecting change. The world around you won't stop changing, so your cadence for improvement better be adapting at the same pace or reflecting on your business's capabilities at the same pace. The SDRs themselves need to continuously prove its worth and improve. So it is something that people will want to eliminate if they can. Any excess meetings, we always want to chuck. So make sure this is a valuable meeting. Don't forget to include business outcomes. This is why the stakeholders are important. I don't want you to be focused on macroeconomic situations for the organization. That's a different meeting. But if you are focused on improving your business outcomes, you're more likely to do the hard work to make yourself a better business. And don't forget that this is a people problem. I've been trying to make it so that you can build engaging, inclusive, useful SDRs that allow you to connect with customers, stakeholders, and your team members in a meaningful way. So let's not forget that this is a bunch of humans who are struggling in a system that doesn't really think about them very often. How can we make it better for them? So that's it. So just some resources really quickly. This is me. I would encourage you all to reach out to me anytime you want about anything. I usually try to respond right away. And also, if you want to engage me in a professional manner, I'm not above that. I'm not going to lie. I like to work too. So if you want me to help you where you work, just send me an email. All of this stuff is grounded in the body of knowledge from the Kanban University and on Kanban.plus. There's a couple of good books that I always recommend for people who are getting started. Kanban from the Inside by Mike Burrows, and now the new B2 of the Blue Book, which is now called Discovering Kanban by David Anderson. And that's it. I super appreciate you letting me go over And I'm happy to stay around as long as anybody needs to answer any questions. I don't know if any came up in the chat, so
Let's
I'm
give
happy to
Dave
stay.
a round of applause and then we'll grill him. Well done. Thank you, Dave. Do you know what? I was sitting here thinking, oh, maybe Dave will come back and do one on the operations review. I think that would be also a good one to have a look at in this session. So I have got some questions for you.
Okay.
So actually, I had one, and it was right at the beginning. And you said, you sit down with the customers and you say, oh, we're delivering in 8 days or less. And you ask them like, oh, how is that for you? I don't know about anyone else's customers, but my customers are always going to be like, no, we need it quicker. And then you said, well, we'll then have a conversation to see how we can facilitate that being quicker. But it's not always as simple as that. And sometimes you do have to push back on your customers and be like, dude, you're being unreasonable here. We can improve it, but we can't improve it that much that soon. So what are your key top tips to helping to manage customers' expectations and pushing back in situations like that?
I mean, for one, giving yourself the opportunity to have the conversation is a really, that's just the first step, right? If you don't create a situation by which you can have empathy or your customer can have empathy, then, and that's not going to happen through email or a CSAT submission form. So you need to create that opportunity to have that conversation. The next step, though, is then to lean back on a more detailed discussion of, if you need to, of your workflow, of what and why you feel you can't, in the short term, meet their expectation. And is there any mitigations that, can they, so if I said I can do it in 10 and they said we need it in 8, and I'm like, I can't do it in 10, but I can do it in 9 in the short term. Can we meet in the middle until there's more investment in the organization, more hands, whatever it is that requires an organization to get to 8? Ultimately, if the markets, one part that I sort of miss in here is that most of the teams I work with don't have external facing customers. They actually have what I call little c customers. They're an internal business group that depends on another internal business group. And so they are what I call little c customers. So in that case, there's probably a VP or two above that you're able to loop in. And this is where what you just alluded to in operations review. If one team depends on another team and they're not able to find that middle ground, there should be somebody above the organizational structure who can facilitate finding the middle ground. So if it is external customers and they say 8 days or we're going to your competitor, you have some soul searching to do. Whether you get there in 8, you can get right to 8 days, or you get there 9 in the next 6 months and then 8. Having external customers is certainly more challenging. But again, the first step is just facilitating that conversation, creating an opportunity to have empathy, but supported by data. You can't just come and say, hey, please let me do this in 9 days. Like, that's not how Kanban works. Kanban works by modeling a process, instrumenting it, knowing how it works, and then having a conversation about how could we change it economically. Change doesn't happen for free. It costs money. We're businesses. So I don't know if I've answered your question. I hope I
Kind
have.
of, it really depends, if it's an external customer, internal customer, but at least if they push back, at least don't you? Like it has
Oh, yeah.
some sort of expectation that you can work to. So take it from there.
Yeah. And
Okay.
you're going to have more opportunities to improve than you can act on. So you have to triage them, act on the ones that you can, that have the biggest bang for the buck.
Yeah.
That are most important. So.
All right. So we've got Tomo. I was then going to ask you a question. So if you're going to ask them for yourself, that's amazing. Take it away.
That'd be great. Thanks. Most of the teams I work with started as Scrum teams, and maybe still are when I start, and I'm getting them up to a Kanban level. So they don't know SDR, they know retrospective. Any tips for evolving a retrospective into an SDR? I assume that's the right approach.
Yeah. So there's two strategies that I've seen used. So you can do your retrospective just like you have today, and introduce one of these metric, one of these conversations. Like usually Scrum teams are not going to have a lead time metric. So if you can create a lead time metric, even if it's created to done, if it's from in progress to done, just something that becomes a metric that they can become familiar with, that they can get some experience, get their feet wet with, and just say, okay, now introduce a need, some sort of external expectation. My experience with Scrum teams is that Scrum is historically a very defensive posture for a team. We pull work in. We tell you how much work we can take. We are defending our 2-week time box. And yes, there's usually sometimes some pressure to improve the rate of, like certainly they feel pressure to improve their delivery rate, but the Scrum cadences don't necessarily include the customer fitness criteria or the more concrete performance metrics. So in your current retrospective, introduce one, then introduce the expectation and just have a conversation. Build comfort, build familiarity is one way, or you can do it the other way. If you have if you don't feel like you have a lot of emotional resistance to Kanban, or you have a lot of familiarity with Kanban practices, do an SDR, but attach the retrospective to it. And this is a red squirrel, gray squirrel situation where put them both together and see which one eventually fades away. In my experience, the retrospective tends to diminish because I'm a little bit biased, I guess, but retrospectives tend to be very fluffy, not
I've
usually
got
very
opinions
actionable.
here, Dave. I've got opinions,
Well,
and I
okay.
know you're going to love to hear them. So you still need to talk, because I had a question I wrote down, which is the relationship between the retrospective, the flow review, and the service delivery review. So they're the kind of scaled up the Kanban maturity model that we have for everybody who's not aware. But I think there's still a place, because you still need to talk privately about people, process, tools, and the fluff. We have to love our people, and we have to create environments where they can build as a team, and give feedback to one another. Equally, having a flow review is quite beneficial, because maybe I want to look at some other data other than the stuff that you've already listed. Maybe I want to look at a cumulative flow diagram to see how things are flowing, maybe do some analysis around how long stuff spends in queues. So I see there's a need for that as well as the SDR stuff. So isn't it like, when you go into Woolworths and you do pick and mix, you need to just pick and mix the bits that you need to be able to help keep the till fulfilling. So I think there is often a need for a retrospective still. Debate.
I don't. Yeah. So one of my aspirations is always to keep SDRs very, like, the agenda is very tight, because I find that people who spend too long talking about things don't want to come to this meeting. But I don't discourage people from adding on retrospective bits after, right? Like, so if you want to, like, and this is, I think the idea of having an SDR and attaching a retrospective is a great spot. Yes, the retrospectives tend never to go away, honestly, but they tend to become a more compact version of what they had been in the past, and the SDR is still providing the actionable insights that it was intended to produce. And I also think one thing that you sort of alluded to, which maybe is another talk on itself, is I think, so at an organizational level, we have the ops review, which is a specific cadence for discovering organizational challenges. Then we have a risk review, which is where we decide what to do about the things that we discovered in the ops review. There is no there is no comparable at the team level. We just have the SDR. And I think it's sort of left to the teams to figure out, okay, well, what other meeting do we do to talk about what are we doing, right? So I've discovered that I have a problem. What do I do about it is a different meeting than the SDR. But we don't have a name for that in the Kanban cadences. There isn't a team level risk review. Well, there might be actually in the KMM. I don't think it got introduced, but I've heard that there was a team level risk review-ish cadence that somebody had introduced somewhere along the way. But I think that generally teams are expected to sort that out on their own. They're together. they can just have a meeting to talk about, hey, let's look at our cumulative flow diagram because our customer has said we need to get down to 8 days. How do we do that? Well, let's get a meeting, discuss our current flow. Where do we see problems? Where can we tighten things up? And so that's where that missing cadence totally has to happen. And I wouldn't discourage it from happening. But your customers don't need to be in that meeting. Your customers don't need to be in a retrospective. Your stakeholders you may not want them in your retrospective. If you're griping about them, you may not want them in your retrospective. But I do want the SDR to capture their expectations and contrast them against our current activities. So,
So
All right.
does
I'll
the
let you
flow
off then.
review end up being the retrospective?
I'll probably say something. I'll probably say something that this is my opinion and not conventional, but I think a flow review is an SDR without a customer. So it's just an SDR that's been being incrementally added onto. If you take away the customer or you take away a stakeholder, you have an SDR with just the team and the team metrics, and you haven't had the expectations of the customers or the stakeholders present. If you add in stakeholder expectations or add in customer expectations, now you have an SDR. So is a flow review an SDR that's just opted out of a couple people, or is a flow review fundamentally different than an SDR? My philosophy is that it's actually an SDR that just has some optional people not there today.
Okay. Also, Tomo wanted to know what tool do you use to do the little person at the bottom? That was OBS, wasn't it? When you're
Yeah, this is OBS. I forget. Open source broadcasting system is the software. If you Google OBS, I have my camera and I have a layer in OBS that's the window that I'm presenting, and then I have I layer them over top of each other. And as I change scenes, OBS is just watching which window is active and just flipping the two sources or flipping to a different scene. So that's how this works.
All right, I've got some more questions for you. I've got 2 more. These ones are actually both from Maru. So his questions are, how did you measure the quality? And how do you facilitate these SDRs so they're not so dry? So you've already said you need someone who's good at storytelling, but what other techniques can you kind of give us to stop it being like as dry as the Sahara?
Wow, that dry one is hard. So to talk about the dry one, this is having a facilitator who's engaged, who is excited, who knows how to tell an exciting story about dry metrics. I can't get away from the fact that this is a dry thing. It's just accepting that it is numbers, graphs. So telling a story, engaging with people, facilitation is mostly soft skills, I think, that makes it not a boring conversation. Also, not having too much. Like, people can tolerate a little bit of dry, but they don't want to tolerate an hour of dry. So if you have an hour-long SDR and you're just blasting numbers and screens and you don't stop to talk, don't stop to smell the flowers or smell the pile of doo-doo on the sidewalk, so it's mostly a soft skills facilitation thing. You can mitigate that by just, trying to make sure that your content, you don't have just hours of boring content. So the one question, that was the dryness. And then the other one was, sorry.
How did you measure the quality in your report?
Oh, in this particular report, quality is just defects versus features. Like, so how much time do we spend on, or how many bugs? It's not time, it's how many bugs do we have versus how many features do we have in a particular observation period. So it tends to be, this report is currently just showing the last 12 weeks. So in the last 12 weeks, we had 4% bugs or 25% bugs or whatever the number is. So that's how we track quality. The report itself, Let me just double check here.
Just while you're double checking, when you talk about bugs, are you talking about bugs that are found in the live environment or bugs that are found during testing, or both?
So that is going to be up to the team itself, right? So how do they want to measure these particular things? In this particular case, or in this customer's case, the customer who this report is built off of, it is escaped defects. So these are all things that a customer or someone external to the team, it may be another team that is dependent on their work. That's how these teams are generally detecting or tracking defects, because they expect a developer to not be perfect, and that cadence between QA and developer in development is expected to find problems, and we don't care about those. We don't care about finding those. We expect to find like escaped defects are more problematic than the ones that are in the development process. So that's what these teams are measuring. And in this case, it's just, where did I don't, oh, it's not on this one. Oh no, sorry, it is in this one. So I'm going to change the name of this to from is quality issue. This particular client, they don't just use bug work item types or bugs to indicate that there was a problem. They use tags. So you can actually tag a feature and say that it had a defect. So, but it's not a bug. It's just some quality issue that was found in the outcome. So we try to find the name if there's a quality issue. And in this case, they had 17 quality issues which represented 2% of their work. Well, sorry, this is my sample data, but no, this one's real data. Sorry, this is a picture of real data. Yeah, so in this particular one, there was 2% failure rate, which isn't necessarily bad, but they do want to eliminate it as much as possible. So did I answer your question?
Yeah, you answered it, and the extra ones that I threw in there for clarification. You're doing well.
Okay.
You're doing well at this, grilling. Now, I haven't actually got any more questions. So is there any more questions in the room?
Or if you just have an opinion about this, I would love to hear that too, even if it's not like a question about what I've said, but if you have an opinion about this that we haven't captured, I'd love to hear that as well.
How many of the cadences do you use?
The three that I primarily get a chance to focus on is SDRs, daily stand-ups, and replenishment. In order of frequency or ease of use. So the daily stand-up is generally easy to engage with and try to Kanbanize. The SDR is relatively easy to introduce. The replenishment meeting is remarkably difficult to implement because organizations have their way of replenishing. It doesn't generally adhere to WIP limits, and they don't want to change that until you've done enough SDRs that show that you're chronically overburdened, that you can't meet your expectations. And then they say, well, how do we fix this? It's like, oh, hey, how would we put WIP limits in place, or we replenish differently? In which case, then we start to work on the replenishment meeting. So those are the three that I primarily. The delivery, I typically work with internal teams that are dependent on each other, and they don't do delivery planning. I have done ops reviews. I've done probably 5 ops reviews. Those are hard because it requires enough SDRs being done by enough teams at the right maturity level to make an ops review meaningful. Then an ops review is a very expensive meeting. You're typically going to have senior executives. Their time is very valuable. It's expensive. And there's a lot more emotional resistance to doing those if it's not a good meeting. So ops reviews are definitely, there's just not enough companies out there that are at the maturity level that they know what to do with an ops review, or they have the data that's required to supply an ops review.
Well, I'll give you until next year, Dave, to come up with enough SDRs to be able to do an ops review for us.
That's the goal. The goal is to so the destination, when I engage with a customer, the destination in my head is an ops review. Obviously, if they're a super small group, I'm not, or if there's no reasonable expectation that we would be able to reach that level of individual and organization, I'm not going to target that. But in my head, I want to fix a business. Fixing the business means empowering the teams to adjust and adapt and improve, which means that individuals need to be empowered to contribute. And we need to all improve in the right direction. So in my head, I'm always thinking ops review. If you do an ops review, you have an opportunity to do a risk review because you've discovered problems in the organization. And a risk review is where we decide what we're going to tackle organizationally. So ops reviews and risk reviews, if you're going to do an ops review, you'll probably be able to do a risk review relatively easily a week after the ops review. So those are the ones that I use. I know companies are being strategic, but I've never seen a Kanban strategy review done in the wild.
There's the challenge. If anybody, or Dave, or Alexi, or anyone does one, we want to know about it. All right, so I think that's good for the questions tonight. I feel like we've got our money's worth out of Dave, considering he gave up his time for free. So we'll let him have a break because he's still literally got a full day's of work ahead of him. So unlucky for some. So thank you all very much for staying behind. I've really enjoyed this evening. I learned a few things myself, and I love looking at your tool as well, Dave. So I really appreciated that. So let's give him one final round of applause. Not that you can probably hear it.
Also forgot, I'm going to make sure this slide deck is available for Helen. So she's going to put it in the slide share. I'm going to make this report that I just turned into a PDF available. And my goal with this PBIX, this Power BI tool, there's a little console app that goes along with it to generate the data. So my goal is to take both of those and make them publicly available for you guys too. So you can actually grab this and play with it yourselves. So keep it. Helen's going to put links in this meetups meeting. So just watch for them to come over time.